Despite what nostalgia might tell you, when Resident Evil 3 first came out on the PlayStation 1, it wasn't exactly well received. Compared to Resident Evil 2, it felt a lot smaller, there is only one campaign, it was about the length of one of the two main scenarios in 2, Milish can vary on that one, and the only changes to the ending is who gets to pilot a helicopter. But despite not reviewing or selling too well back then, time has helped it develop its own cult status, and that is largely thanks to having the most iconic enemy in the entire franchise, the Nemesis. And that's because gameplay-wise, Nemesis broke new ground. He's far more aggressive than even Mr. X or Birkin in Resident Evil 2. He showed up so often he was basically the main antagonist, and most terrifyingly, he could follow you through doors, to the point the calm and soothing savior music changes into a theme of fear and dread, telling you Nemesis is waiting for you right outside. The reason I'm telling you all of this is to give you context, because after Resident Evil 2 Remake knocked it out of the park, everyone, myself included, was beyond excited to see what Resident Evil 3 could do. And the results, well, to say there was backlash to it would sell it short. But I am not here to preach to the choir, and despite me explaining why Resident Evil 3 means so much to me and many others, I will still rather review and judge it as its own standalone thing, much like I did with the remake of 2. Now, I'm not going to trash this game, but I will also not hold back on pointing out its lowest points, so let's get started. Resident Evil 3 has you take control of Jill Valentine. Returning from Resident Evil 1, and right in the aftermath of surviving that nightmare, she now has to escape Raccoon City, right as the T-Virus outbreak has started. To complicate things, she is being hunted by Nemesis. So with everything stacked against her, she has to reluctantly team up with her other player character, Carlos Oliveira, a member of the UBCS trying to evacuate surviving civilians and also escape, before the outbreak gets them and what's left of his squad first. And that's it really. With the entire city burning down around you, you have to scavenge and face increasingly difficult odds just so you can safely secure your escape route. A lot of elements come back from Resident Evil 2 gameplay wise, but in other aspects the game has now become a lot more intense and more combat oriented. In what seems like a response to Resident Evil 2 Remake players dismembering zombies to render them harmless and keep exploding without problem, Resident Evil 3 made zombie limbs a lot more durable, forcing you to actually put the zombies down if you don't have any other choice. But that's not to say you're going to be gunning down zombies like it's nobody's business. Ammo is as scarce as ever, and even on normal difficulty you are going to have to do inventory and resource management, having to decide when to shoot and when to run away. Because zombies and mutants are more aggressive this time around, Jill has a dodge ability. Pressing it normally will have you step out of the way of zombies, giving you a chance to run away. But if you time it and pull a perfect dodge properly, you get to enter into a bullet time stance, letting you nail whoever attacked you for a few seconds. Even if easier difficulties don't really give you enough situations where you would like to dodge, it is still a mechanic you are better off learning, because the harder the difficulty mode you pick, the more of a lifesaver dodging becomes. That is not to say the game has become linear and mindless like 6 did. Trust me, I played 6. So what's the catch? Although the level design has become a little more linear and that light Metroidvania magic of 2 is gone, you still need to do some resource management if you are planning to grab the better guns. Padlocks, chains, and electronic locks stand between you and those much needed resources. And with a limited inventory, even on a first playthrough you have to do multiple trips to the item box and make a strategic choice on how much ammo to pick, which key items to have in hand to break those chains and locks, and how much empty space you want in order to scavenge for more supplies. What makes hunting for those supplies and making progress through the game all the more fun for me is also the atmosphere. This game may be a little shorter compared to 2, but the atmosphere continues to be fantastic, and it complements the reward areas and enemies a lot. Even in subsequent playthroughs, I was feeling the dread you feel while exploring the sewers, and being afraid of bumping into a hunter gamma that can kill you instantly. Or watching your corners constantly so you don't get infected with flesh-eating parasites from the water demons. And this same magic is felt when you explore places like the police station and hospital. Much like with 2, this game does a little something I love, that is create little crescendos. In certain areas, you are going to start with not much really happening out there. But as you explore these levels, you start to notice something is going seriously wrong, and when the time finally comes, you get to unload all your ammo and even run for your life, depending on how well prepared you came. I know so far I am singing a lot of praises to the gameplay, and I know I am very likely having an unpopular opinion. Trust me, I've seen what many feel about this game. But for me, the depth of the gameplay really works because I always appreciated when the core gameplay has the depth where I can challenge myself and use the bare minimum of tools. Or just take all the ammo I can take and blast my enemies into oblivion. Or simply speedrun past everything, because that is something that is not being done in a set piece. It's being done by me, with gameplay and my own inputs. It helps a lot that I actually enjoy the story in these remakes. Once again, I know a number of people are not happy with the way the story was being handled, and how a lot of the nuances of the writing are coming at the cost of losing variable scenarios and multiple endings. But for me, I feel it's a price worth paying, as now Resident Evil is finally having a more cohesive story, at least when it comes to the classic games. To use this game as a point of reference, the story is fleshed out a bit more in terms of character. Jill was awesome in the original, and what little story we saw of her reluctant alliance with Carlos was nice. But it lacked a bit more impact. This time around, however, Jill is actually carrying the baggage of what she went through and lost during the mansion incident. She was suspended by the RPD, and Umbrella all but ruined her reputation and career by making sure nobody believed her or her colleagues, and that is on top of the PTSD she's going through. So it only makes sense that in this remake, Jill is a lot more angry and standoffish towards Carlos and the UBCS. But as you progress through the story, something very magical happens: character development. This is a story of how Jill starts to learn to trust again, and the UBCS mercenaries also showing that they are as much victims of Umbrella as she is. We see how these characters this time around are more human and a lot less cartoony heroes. The B-movie factor is still there, but with a more earnest effort to it, and I love it. But it doesn't really matter how many little details I love about this game, it is not going to change a sad reality. There is one legitimate flaw that has made everyone so mad, and why Capcom's A-team is handling the remake of Resident Evil 4 instead of the B-team that made Resident Evil 3. The campaign is the only thing this game has. This game came out roughly a year after the release of Resident Evil 2, and much like its PlayStation 1 release, it feels like it is trying to cash in on 2's success. And they knew they couldn't justify throwing a single campaign with no real unlockables and extra modes, variables or even costumes aside from infinite ammo weapons for a full price tag. So they decided to compromise. And that compromise was that it was bundled together with Resident Evil Resistance. It's a supposedly competitive asymmetrical PvP multiplayer game, in the same vein of Dead by Daylight, Friday the 13th, or Evolve. I will say this is yet another game to throw into the pile of worldless competitive PvP Resident Evil games Capcom stubbornly wants to force the community to play. But with Resident Evil Burst still confirmed to be in development, it simply keeps happening. I really don't know how many of these games Capcom is gonna keep sending out to flop before they finally realize we don't play Resident Evil for PvP. Whether it is traditional survival horror or just silly military shooting, we play Resident Evil to have fun in the single player, or at most enjoy it with friends. If they really want to give us a mode where we can simply kill enemies for a high score, just revisit the Mercenaries Mode. Because to this day, I am still salty that we lost the Mercenaries Mode for Resident Evil 3. It was how you unlocked all the powerful guns and infinite ammo for New Game Plus, and it was a legitimate fun challenge to run around the city as either Mikhail, Carlos or Nikolai. And the fact that Capcom decided to ditch that for a bunch of wordless randos in Resistance, it simply breaks my heart. But even with those flaws, even with the fact the campaign can be beat in 4 to 6 hours on your first run, and S rank in the hardest difficulty can take you a little more over an hour if you know what you are doing, I still can't bring myself to hate this game. I actually love it. It does help that it didn't pay too much for my copy. It was cheap enough to treat it as DLC for Resident Evil 2, and to be honest, that's the only way I could really recommend it. Buy it when it's super cheap, and treat it as a companion piece to 2, because while it clicked for me, I know a single standalone campaign is going to feel off for others, especially if they paid full price for it. What didn't feel love for me, however, was Nemesis himself. Yeah, he's got more set pieces and scripted boss fights, but what we got of him, I loved every minute of. If you thought Mr. X was aggressive and scary in Resident Evil 2 Remake, Nemesis is just relentless. Whether it is in a regular encounter or if it is in a proper boss fight, he is one of the most dangerous elements in the game, and the ways you can deal with him also play a part in that open gameplay. Unless of course it's the obligatory boss fight. You can either run away from him or face him head on if you are confident enough. Running away is usually the smart choice for first-time players, but it's not an easy task. Nemesis can run really fast. Sometimes he can just let you gain some distance on him, then suddenly launch himself ahead of you with his tentacles. To avoid taking too much damage is where using your tools or the environment come in handy. Facing him head on is only advisable if you know what you are doing. Nemesis has a very obvious weak spot in his chest, but in order to hit it, you need to have good aim, and this is where the dodging mechanic plays a big part. You get only small openings to attack him, and in harder difficulties, you better time those dodgings well, because not only does he move way faster, he can and he will one-shot you. I know some may ask, why fight him if the more efficient thing to do is simply run away? Well, there may not be too many encounters against him during regular gameplay, but if you face him and win, he always drops a crate with either upgrades for your guns or some much needed supplies. It feels really good and it is very rewarding after feeling genuinely terrorized by him. Now, this is gonna be a controversial take, but I actually like that Nemesis got a lot more set pieces and makes up pretty much all the boss fights of this game, because narrative-wise, it makes sense. Outside of Nikolai, Nemesis is the main antagonist, and the entire point of 3's story is Jill and the UBCS attempting to escape Raccoon City while Nemesis is constantly on their trail. I love the original encounters to bits, I love classic Resident Evil 3 to bits, but having Nemesis escalate his hostilities against Jill at every turn made it all the more satisfying, and gave it an even bigger sense of climax to every encounter. And if you want an even bigger controversial take, as much as it hurts that we lost entire levels like the Clock Tower and bosses like the Gravedigger, I still feel this is a really good remake, at least for what it is. Call me crazy, but a game like this that I can replay and beat faster and faster with each new playthrough thanks to how open the gameplay gets at times, felt a lot more refreshing after going through games that offer hundreds of hours of content. I understand why so many fans and reviewers got angry at launch. We live in a time where people now more than ever want to get more out of their game if the entry price is going to be $60 to $70. But I personally feel this obsession with how much time you get out of the first playthrough has blinded everyone. Even if there's no unlockables, branching paths, even if there is not much in the way of achievements of extra modes, simply going through the game again is just as much fun as when you played it the first time. Sure, you already beat it, you know what's going to happen, and in the age of the backlog, you want to move on to the next game as soon as possible. For me, however, I've been replaying some of my games, and it turns out a second, third, even fourth playthrough can get even more interesting, because the more you know of the game, the more spectacle you can make out of the gameplay. In the case of Resident Evil, you can go from stumbling around in the dark and taking a lot of damage in the first playthrough to straight up making your character look like the professional the story shows them as. This is why I am giving Resident Evil 3 Remake a well-deserved 8 out of 10. I would love to bump it to a 9, but the fact that some of its potential was dragged down by bundling it with Resistance means I have to be more strict. This is a game I love in spite of what the public opinion says of it. It also has made me want to look up more short games. If anyone ever wonders why a number of games went deep into either huge open worlds bloated with side content or live service online games, it's because it was a response to the ever-growing need of feeling like the money you spend in your game copy has to bring you an arbitrary number of hours to feel like your money was well spent. And while I myself don't mind sinking hours upon hours into open world games, taking a break and enjoying smaller and shorter stories can give some much needed refreshment. Because it is as they say, too much of a good thing can be bad, and it's also a quick way to burn yourself out. So it is best to pace yourself and add variety to what you enjoy, so things can stay fresh and fun.